I've only been boarding here for 2 days, and this morning I accidentally opened my bedroom window to do some light exercise before showering and going to work. But when I opened the window, it turned out that my bedroom window directly faced the back of my landlady's house, where there was a well and also a clothesline. My eyes immediately opened when I looked outside. Mrs. Winnie, my landlady, was washing clothes and hanging them out to dry in the back. I think she had just showered because she was only wearing a towel, not a robe and hijab like I usually see. My landlady was around 36 years old, but her posture was no less than that of a teenage girl. Because it was the first time I saw her without a robe and hijab, I was captivated by what my landlady had to offer. She was quite large and looked very beautiful. Mrs. Weenie's face was naturally beautiful, and her skin was also fair. Her figure was ideal. However, she was a little plump in important areas, which made her pleasing to the eye. Being treated to such a sight in the morning, of course, something immediately woke me up. Mrs. Winnie was unaware of the laundry and drying activity she was doing in her backyard. Someone was secretly observing her. I had intended to open the bedroom window wide to breathe in the fresh morning air, but I slowly closed it again. But I left a gap so I could still observe Mrs. Weenie from my rented room. Starting from accidentally seeing Mrs. Weenie, I gradually developed certain feelings for my landlady. Although she was much older than me, who is still 24 years old, the charm of Mr. Richwin's wife, my landlady, always overshadowed my days. My story eventually intertwined with Mrs. Weenie, who turned out to still be in dire need of inner pleasure. However, Mr. Richwin, her husband, was unable to provide it for Mrs. Winnie. Mr. Richwin, Mrs. Weenie's husband, was indeed much older than his wife, because Mrs. Winnie was his second wife, whom he married after Mrs. Richwin passed away. Mr. Richwin was 57 years old and had been married to Mrs. Winnie, who is now my landlady for over 5 years. They have a boarding house, one of the rooms of which I currently occupy. When I was accepted to work at a fairly large repair shop in this city, I rented a boarding house at Mrs. Weenie's place. It was close enough to my workplace that I could walk to work. I've actually known Mrs. Winnie for quite some time because once she went to the repair shop and I serviced her motorcycle at the shop where I worked. It was through that acquaintance that I ended up boarding at her house. While I was waiting for my motorcycle to be serviced, Mrs. Weenie invited me to chat. She asked where I lived, and I told her I was currently staying at my mother's relative's house, as I hadn't found a boarding house near the repair shop. Then Mrs. Weenie said that she happened to have an empty room at her house. But it wasn't for rent, because it was in the back. It used to be a maid's room, but then it became a storage room. If you want to board, just come to my mother's house. While waiting, who knows, maybe another resident will stop boarding. You can move to another room, said Mrs. Winnie at that time. Long story short, I started boarding at Mrs. Weenie's house, occupying the former maid's room and the storage room that she had cleaned. And just on the second day of boarding there, I accidentally saw Mrs. Weenie washing clothes and hanging them out to dry in the back. On the first day, I didn't open my bedroom window, because Mrs. Weenie said that if I opened it, mosquitoes would come in. Besides, the view outside the window was only the laundry area behind her house. It was different from the other boarding room in front. The window faced the front porch of the room. I thought maybe it was because this room wasn't originally a boarding room, but a housemaid's room. It was normal if it was built in a simple way. But on the second day, I opened it to let some air circulate in my room. However, that morning, I saw Mrs. Weenie washing clothes and only wearing a towel. Since then, I have become a two-man. Every morning before leaving for work, I open the bedroom window. Of course, I wanted to feast my eyes again by looking at the beautiful view, but it turned out that Mrs. Weenie didn't wash clothes there every day. As far as I remember, Mrs. Weenie only washed clothes 3 times a week, on Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And every day, my mischievous young soul was challenged to see Mrs. Weenie. Until one morning, Mrs. Weenie found out that I was watching her from my bedroom window. I thought she would be angry with me. However, I didn't expect that at that time, Mrs. Weenie would actually step closer to my bedroom window. "You're peeping at my mother washing her clothes. Why is the window open?" She greeted me with a friendly smile. I was a bit alarmed at that time because I was caught looking at my landlady, but I was a bit relieved because she turned out not to be angry, but instead smiled at me. I replied, "Sorry, ma'am. I opened the window so that there would be circulation and fresh air to enter my room. I really didn't know that my mother was washing clothes there. I told her a lie. Then Mrs. Winnie said, "Yes, it's okay. The room is stuffy, so you have to open the window every now and then. Yes, I'm sorry if the boarding room is simple. You know, this used to be the maid's room. Besides, you're only staying in this room temporarily. If another occupant moves out, you can take their place and move to the boarding room in front," she said. At that time, I was also surprised why there was a maid, but Mrs. Benny did her own laundry, and why the maid's room wasn't occupied by a maid. I then asked Mrs. Winnie, "Why isn't this room occupied by a maid anymore, ma'am? In fact, it was used as a storage room yesterday." That's when Mrs. Winnie started confiding in me, and I just found out that Mrs. Winnie is Perituan's second wife, whom he married after Mrs. Rituan died 5 years ago. Mrs. Winnie said, "Well, how can the maid occupy this room again? Because the maid has already married the employer." So actually, it used to be my own mother who was a maid in Perituan's house, and after Mrs. Rituan died, Perituan even asked me to marry her. Finally, the maid became a mistress, explained Mrs. Winnie. Since then, Perituan and Mrs. Winnie got married and decided not to use a maid anymore. I listened to Mrs. Winnie's story, but secretly also noticed the sight of her at that time. She had just taken a shower and washed clothes. Every now and then, Mrs. Winnie's attitude of fixing her towel seemed to tempt me to keep staring at it. It would be too long if I wanted to tell it now. "You'd better take a shower now and go to work. Later, I'll invite you to chat longer, okay?" said Mrs. Winnie. I replied, "Yes, ready, ma'am. Besides, after work I don't have anything to do, just daydream and fantasize alone in my room." Since that morning, I often talked to Mrs. Aneni, my landlady. Even in the following days, Mrs. Winnie seemed indifferent when she was washing and drying clothes. Even though she knew, I opened the window and watched her activities. In fact, the more I went on, I could feel the changes in my landlady. Mrs. Winnie seemed to be happy when she knew I was mesmerized by my window and let me enjoy the beautiful view she had. Because one time, Mrs. Eni seemed to deliberately change the fabric of her towel while returning my gaze. Until that afternoon after I got home from work, Mrs. Winnie knocked on my door. The reason was to offer me snacks. At the same time, she wanted to consult about her motorbike problem, which was often stuck in traffic. Mrs. Winnie said, "I want to ask for your help if you have time to service my motorbike, but at home, because I'm lazy to take it to the repair shop," she said. Then I said, "Okay, ma'am. I'll do it tonight. Now I want to take a shower first, then get something to eat," I replied. But Mrs. Winnie said, "You don't need to buy food. You can eat at my house tonight. I cooked a lot earlier." "No, but your landlord didn't come home. He said he was still taking care of his pension and also a 3-day farewell out of town. It would be a shame if no one ate my pomfret and clams," Mrs. Winnie said in a very friendly tone to me. Long story short, that night I went to her house for dinner and also to see the motorbike I wanted to service. That night, Mrs. Winnie looked different and very beautiful, wearing a short light blue house dress without a hijab. She seemed happy when I came at night and immediately invited me to dinner in the kitchen. After eating, I wanted to see her motorbike, but Mrs. Winnie said I could service the motorbike later. After eating, I wasn't allowed to go straight to work. "Let's just chat first, okay? Besides, you can still service the motorbike tomorrow." She wasn't going anywhere, she said. It turned out that Mrs. Winnie's motorbike actually had no problems and wasn't stalled. It was just an excuse to get me to come to her house. That's when Mrs. Winnie told me that all this time what needed to be serviced was not her motorbike, but her soul that had been suffering for a long time. Since becoming Pak Rituan's wife for 5 years, Mrs. Winnie admitted that she was happy because her status had been elevated from a servant to the master's wife. However, that happiness was short-lived, because after getting married, Mrs. Winnie rarely received her personal needs. Pak Rituan, who was already quite old, was no longer able to fulfill Mrs. Winnie's spiritual needs. Honestly, when I heard her story, I was influenced, and something began to stir in my heart too. Moreover, at the end of her story, Mrs. Winnie asked me, "Besides being able to service engines and vehicles, can you also help me service this one if I ask you to?" asked Mrs. Winnie. Mrs. Winnie asked me while showing me what she wanted to service, making me even more awkward in front of her. I replied, "Sorry, ma'am. I only graduated from vocational school, majoring in mechanical engineering, so I can only service vehicles. I have never done that before, ma'am. So, I don't know how. I'm afraid I'll make a mistake, ma'am," I said, staring at what was shown in the kitchen. However, Mrs. Winnie said, "It's okay. In fact, It's good if you've never done it before. Later, I will guide and teach you. The important thing is that you want to help, because I can't do it alone, she said. That night, finally, for the first time, I was asked to help Mrs. Eenie. Even though it was my first time doing it, Mrs. Weenie said I had succeeded in helping her and making her happy. Since then, my relationship with my landlady has become closer and closer. Bueni turned out to be a woman who always had high aspirations, so she always took the opportunity to always repeat and ask for my help. Mrs. Eenie said, from now on you don't need to pay the boarding fee. Just think of it as you working and paying the boarding fee by helping me, she said. I actually realized that what I had done was a mistake that could make Perituan Bueni's husband feel very sad if he found out. After 3 months of living here, I wanted to move boarding houses, because there was no way I could continue being like that with Mrs. Weenie. However, just as I was about to move boarding houses, it turned out that Periton had an accident that took his life. At that time, Mrs. Weenie was very sad, because she lost her late husband. Moreover, at that time, Mrs. Weenie, who had longed for a child for a long time, was 2 months pregnant. That night, Bueni came to my room and asked to talk to me. Mom wants to ask, do you want to take responsibility for my pregnancy? Because I am very sad after losing my late husband, she said. I answered, yes, ma'am. I will take responsibility and I will marry you, I replied. Until finally, after her late husband passed away and Mrs. Weenie was officially a widow, I proposed and married Mrs. Weenie. And it's true what the wise say, Leanne, something like that will feel more enjoyable if the status is legal and official. That's my story of finally marrying my landlady. Hopefully you can take a lesson from it, and hopefully you guys are entertained. Yeah.